guys, welcome. This is Jen Frost with Faith in Fabric, and today I'm going to show you how we're going to add some lovely little hanging tabs to this quilt block here. Now, you know, sometimes we put sleeves on the back of our quilts, and that's that long strip on the back that you can usually put like a tube through or a large dowel. But you know, I find a lot of times for these very small little wall hanging quilts, I just want to put some hanging tabs on there. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you how to make your hanging tabs, how to attach them, and how those hanging tabs interact with your binding. Now, because this video is going to be broken up into those segments, you can find those segments down below in chapters. I encourage you to use the chapters. That way you can skip ahead or you can go back to something if you missed a concept that we're going to cover. Now, this quilt block is our Good Friday quilt block. I'll put a link to it below. I'm actually going to also put a link to our Holy Week quilt along that we're having. This is part of a full quilt. This is the 6th block and an 8 block quilt for all of Holy Week. So I'll pop that link below just so you can get a feel for how this actually fits in. As mentioned though, this one's going to be a standalone. The tabs we're going to make today are going to stick up, you know, about an inch or so roughly. You want to adjust the length of your tabs. We'll talk more about that, but you want to adjust the length of your tabs depending on the size of the dowel you're using to hang it. Now, I have a very thin 1/4 inch dowel piece of wood, just picked it up at Home Depot, and so I don't need a lot of space. I also like my tabs a little thicker, so we'll talk more about that, but already I want you to start thinking about how thick do you want to make your tabs. Now, I like to also make my tabs in a color that complements my quilt. So you'll see in this quilt, I am going to be doing my binding in the same purple, so I want my tabs to be in that same purple. That's that purple that you can see back there behind me. So let's head over to the cutting table and start making our tabs. So here's that gorgeous fabric we're going to be working with. Now, earlier I had talked to you about wanting to think about how wide and how deep you want to put those little tabs that are going to go at the top of your little hanging. And I want to show you the sizes I use and why. So here is a very basic math equation for you. You know, in terms of how wide mine are, I like them about an inch wide. And so I'm going to start by making mine 2.5 inches. And here's how that breakdown works. And I want to share this with you so that way, you know, if you want to make yours wider or more narrow, you can see where some of that use gets used. So I start with a 2.5 inch wide piece of fabric. And that's because I'm going to lose 1/2 inch of that just in seams when we turn it. I'm also going to end up with my 2 inches here. We're going to divide that in half because again, when you fold that in fabric in half to make that tab, which means my tab itself is only going to be about 1 inch wide. Same thing over here in terms of how long I want that to be. So that's your up and down. This one's going to be, you know, if you think of your little tab here, this is how wide it's going to be here. And then this side is going to be how long it is. Okay. So I'm going to start with a 4 inch long strip, and I'm going to know that I'm going to lose about 1/4 inch because of the seam that we're going to turn and cut off. I'll be showing you how to do that. So we're going to end up with about 3.75 inches left. We're going to take an inch off because we're going to fold that fabric and double it. And what I mean by that, and you'll see this more, but you're going to take that tab on the back and you're going to be sewing it down, and then it's going to have to fold up. So that's a full inch of that fabric you'll lose on each side of the fabric. So then you're going to be down to about 2 3/4. You're going to fold that in half again. You lose another, divide that in half. And so you're going to end up roughly with about 1 1/3 inches. That's how far it'll stick up. So again, that's perfect for me because I have a very thin dowel. If you have a thicker dowel, you are going to want to work these numbers on your own and probably start with the bigger number on top. Okay. So let's cut our fabric. So as noted, I need 2 strips, 2.5 inches by 4 inches. I'm going to make an 8 inch strip, just double that 4. So we'll get a nice clean cut on this side, and I need 2.5 on this side. So let's come up here. We'll come across the top, and we'll clean that up in a second. Just get this out of the way for our little video here. All right, I'm gonna clean that edge. Get that off. Okay, so now we wanna go, so we've got our 2.5 inches this way, and I'm gonna make my first cut here at 4, and my second cut here at 4. Okay, so I've got both my pieces here. I've got my Iron is turned on over here, ready to press these when we're done. So let's give them a quick press and we'll head over to the machine. Okay, so I've got my first tab here ready to sew. So the first thing we're gonna do is just kind of fold it in half here. Line up your edges all the way down, line up your edges at the top. Now I do have my machine set to back stitch. You definitely want to put a nice secure stitch here and here because we will be turning this. So let's get started here. I'm just using, you know, a little bit less than a 1/4 inch across the top because we're going to end up trimming that. And then I'll do, you know, kind of a sparse 1/4 inch coming down the side. I'll hit the bottom. And I'm going to give it a back stitch here. And then we'll cut that. Okay, so I've got my first piece. We're going to repeat that for the other side, and then we're going to meet up to turn these. So now we have 2 pieces. You should have 2 pieces, and let's turn these. So if you have, there's normally like, if you guys have been with me for a while, I have that nice long clear dowel that usually goes up inside, and then you just use this to tuck it in. It became part of my son's marble run, and so I do not have access to that right now, so I'm just using the bottom piece. This looks actually a little bit like a chopstick here, and we're just going to take that and gently press it through and turn. So you want to be pretty gentle with your fabric. You know, you don't want to push too hard. But the nice thing is we did go ahead and put that back stitch on there, and that back stitch is going to add that little bit of extra, just extra security we need. You could take the sharp pointy tip and you can, you know, kind of work through that. So we're getting there. We've got our first one done. Let's do our second here. So now, as mentioned, we are going to cut that turn seam off. I'll pull our little instructions back so you can see. So we've gone through and we've got our 4 inches, and we're going to be short now because we have our 1/4 inch seam that we turned. And you're going to say, you know, Jen, you didn't actually make a 1/4 inch seam there. You know, you only had, you know, a little bit more than 1/8 on the top, and you're right. And that's because now we're going to come through and we're going to cut that off. And we're going to lose probably another like 1/8 of an inch there in that cut, which is going to account for that first 1/4 inch. So you're going to cut the top of that off, and you're going to pull out any extra guts that might be in there. And to make it smooth. And what that does, the reason I do that, I'll explain that, is you're going to end up sewing both of these edges, and I don't like seeing this seam. So this seam, if you were just to fold your tab and use it like this, you're going to have a part where you're going to see this double seam edge, and I don't like that. By doing the simple step of what we're doing, by cutting that off, we're now going to be able to take this over to our pressing table. We're going to be able to center that seam in the middle. And then when we fold it now, you'll see now each edge is going to be a nice clean edge. So that's why I like to just, you know, clean that up a little bit so you don't see the seam. So same thing, we'll trim this one off, and you'll see I'm cutting so close to the top, just enough to get that seam that we made, that turning seam, out of the way, and then just trimming off any extra guts. So I'm going to press mine. You can press yours. All you're basically going to do is, again, center that middle seam, kind of nest it down, flatten it out, make it go to just one side. I kind of put mine to the left, and then you're gonna press them down flat this way. Okay, let's do that together. So we've got our nice little press tabs. Let's work on attaching them. So your next decision you're gonna have to make is, how far apart do you want your tabs? Do you want them close together? Do you want them, you know, pretty close to the edge? Obviously you can't put them right on the corners because you're gonna have your binding coming around this. But for me, I like to put mine about 2 inches. So I've got a little 2.5 inch square. I'm gonna use the 2 inch mark on here. I'm gonna fold this in half. Again, now that we have that nice seam, I'm gonna fold that seam in half, and I'm gonna line that up with my 2 inch mark, and I'm gonna pin that in place. And then when we go around to attach our binding, this is going to get picked up in that binding. Okay, same thing on this side. Let's cover this edge, mark our 2 inches, fold this little guy in half, and pin him down. Now, one thing I would recommend is, after you pin your pieces down, you'll see I've got my 2 inches here, and I've got some nice space in the middle. I feel like that's gonna look really nice when those come and turn up. I will always recommend double check on the front that you have pinned them to the top. You know, that's such a common mistake as we're going through this. We end up pinning them to the side or to the bottom. So just give a double check that you've pinned them in place properly, okay, on the right side. So once you're done here, you can go ahead and make your binding. I've already got my binding made here. So I just used 2 1/4 inch. And so now you'll see when you come around and attach your binding is going to get picked up right there in your hanging tabs, okay? So we're not doing a tutorial here on binding. I'll put a link up here to one if you need, but I'm gonna assume that you guys have already cut your binding. If you haven't, go ahead and do that. And we'll meet back at the machine and attach our binding so we can get our little tiny tabs attached too. Okay, so let's attach our binding. So I've got my binding here. Again, I cut mine at 2 1/4 inches. And I'm going to attach it to the front. So I use the connected tail method. I don't know the proper name. I'll be sure to look that up for you and let you know here, but I'll teach you how to do that today where it's pretty much seamless. So I'm gonna leave my long little tail here, and I'm just gonna connect it here at the bottom. So use a 1/4 inch seam. We'll back stitch that in place. And then you're gonna stop a 1/4 inch from the end. And I'm gonna lock that in with a lock stitch here. And we'll give that a cut. Then we'll turn our corner. So I'm gonna speed things up a little bit as we go all the way around. There's no special tips for attaching your binding. You make your little corner. You know, the one thing you will wanna make sure is as you get to the top of your quilt where you have your little tabs attached, just make sure that your tab isn't, you know, getting twisted or getting wonky and that you are indeed picking that up. Again, your 1/4 inch line as you're sewing your binding on should come straight across and really lock these in place, okay? So we'll speed things up and we'll meet up at the end. Okay, so I've slowed it up here just so you can see how we're gonna finish this. So we're back on the same side that we started on. You'll see here's my tail from my beginning, and I'm just going to attach this second tail here at the top. So I make my little right angle. I'm gonna stitch that in place here. A little lock stitch, come forward. I'm only gonna come down a few inches and then I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna lock that in place too. And then that'll give me, you know, I've got probably 8 inches here at least to work with. So let's over to the cutting table and we're going to trim our tails up. We are so close to being finished. So here's what we're gonna do next. We have our tails, so I'm gonna trim this one just to take a little bit of that extra off. We're gonna be overlapping them. So you'll see I've got a space now between both of them, and this one overlaps a little past halfway, probably about 2/3 of the way over. Now, I started with my binding being 2 1/4 inches. So I'm gonna line this up on my cutting mat here to be 1, 2, and then my quarter is right about here. Now, I like to cut mine just short of 2 1/4. Let me show you by what I mean by that. So this tail is gonna overlap this one. Now I know I'm starting right here, and we'll mark it right here so you can see it better, that line on my cutting table with that little turning stick. So I'm gonna overlap it. And I'm gonna cut. So from here to here is 1, here to here is 2, and my 1/4 inch is right about there. So I'm gonna cut it just under my line, okay? So now you'll see you have that little bit of overlap. What you're gonna do now is you're gonna open these up, holding your left one still, you know, open that up, take the right and fold it over it so they're kind of giving each other like a little hug and kiss there. You're gonna take your pins, put one through the top. That pin has seen better days, hasn't it? My gosh. You're gonna put one through the bottom and you're gonna put that in place there. Now you can come through and we're basically gonna be sewing corner to corner because this looks like the way you probably started your binding when you needed to make longer strips. So you're gonna be sewing from this corner all the way to this corner right here. Now you can go ahead and you can mark that if you want. I don't mark mine. I sew close enough, but you can go ahead and mark that if you'd like, and then we're gonna head over to the cutting table and sew. Okay, so I've got my fabric all lined up under here. Put that presser foot down, and you'll see, again, I don't mark mine. You can make your straight line if you'd like. I know I'm literally only going a couple inches from this corner down here, and I can see where this corner is. It's in my line of vision here, so I'm just gonna come straight through and connect that corner. Okay, we'll give that a cut. You can remove your pins. I'm gonna put that little bent one right in the trash. And then you're gonna trim your tail off right here. You know, and again, about 1/4 of an inch. Trim on that. And you'll see now what happens is this is going to lay perfectly flat, nice and smooth on there. So you can take this over to your pressing table, wherever you iron, and you can press the seam down. That'll make it nice and smooth. For purposes of our demo today, I'm just gonna come and sew this on here for you to finish it off. So let's go straight down and still keeping that 1/4 inch seam right along the edge there. And I'm gonna finish up where I started. Lock it in place. And we're done. Let's go take a look and see what we've got. Let's see how it turned out. So we've got our little quilt here. You've got your binding attached on the front and you've got your tabs on the back. Take those pins out. You don't want to stick yourself. And now you'll see your tabs have been securely attached. Now I'm not going to bore you guys by having you sit here and watch me hand stitch this on even in fast motion. That's pretty boring. So we're going to pretend that I already came around and hand stitched my binding. Now before you hand stitch your binding, 2 quick tips. First, clip your corners off. That'll reduce that bulk. Second, when you open up your binding here, I like to come back and gently press this with my iron just to make a nice even open seam on the front. I find that helps make it a lot more even and easier to fold on the back. So we're gonna fast forward. We're gonna pretend our corners are clipped. We're gonna pretend that this is all pressed, and we're even gonna pretend that I've already hand stitched this on. So if it were hand stitched, this is how your back would look. You would then have your little tab just kind of hanging down. And what you would do is now when you're ready to hang it, your little tab can just pop up. You can even, if you want to, you can press that if you want. But your little tabs will be covered. You won't see any seams, and you'll have these great little guys to hang your quilt from. So again, this is where I talked how it's important to think about how thick your dowel is, and then how much do you want sticking up. So you can see I'm pretty much right on. That's just above, it's probably like 1 1/3 inch like we talked about. And that gives me plenty of room to slide in. My dowel is only about 1/2 of an inch, and you can see I can easily fit my finger through there, and my finger is a lot thicker than the dowel. But you can even make them thicker. Again, mine are only about 1 inch wide, and that's perfect. That's the width I like. You can really modify this. Now, one other variation I just wanted to share, going forward for your next project is, some people say, I don't like having the tabs on the back. You can also, if you prefer, you can take, we put them on the back of our quilt, you can attach them to the front. And what all that would mean is your tab would hang from the front. Now, some people prefer that look. Again, it's just going to come down to a preference for you, whether you want it attached on the back or attached on the front. There's no right or wrong. So I hope your little quilt block turned out okay. Again, I definitely invite you guys to join me for taking a look at this full quilt. Again, there's a link to it below as well as to this quilt block, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.